Oops. Did I just shove you, old man? My mistake. The floor is wet, son. Be careful. The janitor calls me son. You hear that, everybody? I meant no disrespect. Watch the floor, old man. That's all you're good for. Please, I still have work to finish. Then work. Shine my belt, janitor. All right then. I clean floors. I don't shine belts. You'll clean whatever I tell you to clean. 12 wins, old man. 12. What do you have? A wet floor and a long memory. Film this. The mop guy thinks he's tough. Smile for the camera, Grandpa. No, sir. Floors are just slippery when you don't watch your step. I never slip. Everybody slips, son. Some people just haven't met the floor yet. Blaine Prescott laughed because, after 12 straight wins, confidence had hardened into certainty. He had no idea that the janitor he was mocking had once trained 3 national champions. Have you ever been laughed at by someone who had no idea who you really were? Before most of the city was awake, the lights inside Ironclad Performance Center came on one row at a time. Silas Whitaker unlocked the side entrance with the same quiet motion he had used for years. He filled his bucket, measured the soap with the precision of a chemist, and pushed his mop across the training floor in long, even arcs that never crossed their own path. Most people cleaned a floor. Silas read one. Every scuff told him something. A dragged mark near the heavy bags meant somebody had trained tired. A heel streak near the edge of the mat usually belonged to a fighter, favoring a sore knee. A strange pivot mark could reveal bad balance before the fighter who made it even noticed. Silas knew the gym better than some of the people who owned it. I was 68, lean and wiry, with white stubble, deep lines around his eyes, and hands the color of worn leather. He moved slowly, but never carelessly. If you watched him long enough, small details became hard to ignore. He never planted his weight heavily on both heels. He folded cleaning rags into perfect thirds, corners sharp enough to look measured. When a barbell rolled unexpectedly from a rack, his hand caught it before his eyes seemed to follow. A trainer laughed the moment away. "Lucky catch," he said. Silas only nodded. Luck was a word he was happy to let other people keep. Home was a small brick house on the east side of the city. It was paid off, quiet, and almost painfully neat. The shelves held no public trophies from the life Silas had left behind. What they held instead were absences. A framed photograph rested face down on the mantel. Silas dusted around it carefully and never turned it over. In the bedroom closet sat a wooden box with a brass lock. The key hung on a chain beneath his shirt, resting against his chest. For 15 years, Silas had not opened that box. Some nights he took it down and sat with it across his knees. His fingers would find the brass lock, but the key never turned. I would simply sit there and listen to the house breathe. Blaine Prescott, trained at Ironclad, as though the building had been constructed around him. He was 24, a black belt, undefeated through 12 straight regional fights, and already the owner of a highlight reel people replayed every day. The problem was not that Blaine lacked talent. The talent was real. That was exactly the problem. Talent without humility is gasoline with nowhere safe to go. Blaine's kicks cracked against pads like gunshots. Every loud impact made him glance toward the mirrors. Gym members orbited around him. Sponsors messaged him. More than 100,000 followers replayed his knockouts and called him the future. Blaine agreed with them loudly and often. Behind him stood his father, Conrad Prescott, a wealthy real estate developer whose name seemed to appear on every new tower downtown. Conrad had written the largest sponsorship check Ironclad had ever received. The gym manager, Garrett Reeves, treated that check like a diploma. Garrett had 2 simple rules. Keep the equipment clean. Keep the Prescotts happy. When Blaine's jokes crossed the line, Garrett suddenly became very interested in whatever was written on his clipboard. He was not a monster. At least that was what people liked to say. He was simply a man whose courage bent in the direction of money. Tessa Caldwell worked at the front desk, and she noticed more than people realized. She liked Silas. He remembered birthdays. He always cleaned the break room, even when it was not part of his shift. If somebody forgot an umbrella, he would quietly leave his own near the door and pretend not to know where it went. One evening, Tessa saw a boy from the children's class standing alone near the corner of the training floor. The boy was small, frustrated, and throwing punches into empty air after everyone else had left. His stance was a mess. His feet crossed too often. His chin stayed high. His balance leaked away with every punch. The coaches were gone. Nobody was watching. Nobody except Silas. He passed with his mop, slowed for half a step, and tapped the boy's back foot with the wooden handle. "Move this one here, son." The boy shifted. Silas turned the boy's hips slightly with 2 fingers, then lowered his chin with one gentle touch. "Better." That was all he said. Then he kept walking, as if nothing had happened. The boy reset his stance and threw the punch again. This time it snapped through the empty room like a whip. Tessa froze behind the front desk. The phone beside her was ringing, but for a moment she forgot to answer it. The boy stared at his own fist. Silas disappeared into the hallway, pushing his bucket and humming something old under his breath. That was the first time Tessa seriously asked herself a question that would eventually pull apart the whole story. Who taught the floor guy to build a fighter with 2 fingers? Soon after, Blaine Prescott returned to Ironclad, carrying another trophy and another victory. His winning streak had grown again, and the gym was crowded with people eager to celebrate him. Phones appeared before Blaine had even removed his jacket. He played the footage of his latest knockout on the large screen more than once. People cheered. Blaine smiled. Then the excitement became familiar, and familiar things bored him quickly. Champions without discipline sometimes go looking for entertainment. Blaine found his pushing a mop along the far wall. What happened next lasted only seconds. Dozens of phones captured it. Blaine walked over grinning at his followers and shoved Silas with both hands. The old man hit the floor. His bucket tipped with him. Gray mop water poured across his uniform, soaked his shirt and pants, and streaked one side of his face. The gym exploded with laughter. "Relax, Grandpa, it's just a joke. Somebody get the janitor a life jacket." Silas stayed in the spreading puddle for one long breath. Then he pushed himself up slowly, joint by joint, the way older men sometimes rise when pride is the heaviest thing they are carrying. I did not glare at Blaine. I did not curse. He picked up the bucket, straightened the wet floor sign, wrung out the mop, and began cleaning the same place again in those long, even arcs while the phones recorded his soaked back. Only one person in the room was not laughing. The little boy from the children's class stood near the cubbies with his gym bag over one shoulder. I was staring at the man who had quietly fixed his stance, being treated like a piece of furniture. Silas met the boy's eyes for only a moment. Then he looked away. Some things hurt worse than a wet uniform. The clip spread across the internet almost immediately. Blaine posted it with a laughing caption about the mop man going down. Hundreds of thousands of people watched it. Strangers copied the clip, slowed down Silas's fall for comedy, and turned his humiliation into a joke they could scroll past before breakfast. Only a handful of people asked whether the old man was all right. Across town, Silas sat on the edge of his bed. His wet uniform hung over the bathtub. The wooden box rested on his knees. For 15 years, the key around his neck had stayed warm against his chest and useless to everything else. Silas rubbed his thumb across the brass lock once, then again. For the first time since the funeral, he put the key into the lock and turned it. Inside were 3 things. A black belt worn soft and gray around the edges from thousands of classes. A photograph of 4 smiling people standing beneath a national championship banner. And an old phone, years out of date, kept charged by a habit Silas had never explained to anyone. He looked at all 3 for a long time. I did not touch the belt. I did not lift the photograph. He closed the box again and returned the key to the chain around his neck. Blaine woke up to a different kind of fame. Not fight fame. Internet fame. It was louder, faster, and hungrier. The Janitor video passed millions of views. Blaine's follower count climbed. A supplement company reached out with a new offer. Blaine stared at the numbers and learned one of the oldest lessons of the algorithm. Cruelty performs. His knockouts required weeks of training. Humiliating a janitor had taken only seconds. So when somebody asked what he would post next, Blaine did not talk about another title fight. "Give the people a sequel," he said. The harassment continued. Silas found his supply cart locked inside the sauna, the metal handles almost too hot to touch. Another day, someone dumped an entire container of protein powder across a lobby Silas had just cleaned. Blaine filmed the old man kneeling in white dust while people laughed behind the camera. Then Blaine blocked a hallway and refused to move until Silas bowed to him. "Bow to the champ, Grandpa. It's tradition." Silas lowered his head in a small, slow bow. The camera loved it. So did the followers. Every clip ended with Blaine smiling into the lens and talking about respect while showing none. Tessa went to Garrett Reeves more than once. Garrett studied his clipboard each time. "Boys blow off steam," he said. "Silas hasn't complained." That part was true. Silas never complained. But Tessa had started doing something quietly. Before the security system erased old footage, she copied the important files to a silver hard drive she kept outside the gym. She could not fully explain why she was doing it. She only knew somebody should. One evening, Silas sat in his truck after work, too tired to drive home right away. I took the old phone from the wooden box. There was one saved voicemail on it. Silas had kept the old number alive for years because losing that message felt like losing a voice he could never hear again. He pressed play. "Hey, Dad, it's me. We're stopping for gas outside Dayton. We'll be there soon. Coach Whitaker and Champion Whitaker. That's going to look pretty good on one trophy, right? Love you. Watch the door. I'm bringing it home." Julian Whitaker's voice was 19 years old forever. Bright, excited, alive in a way that could only exist inside that old recording now. Silas listened twice. I did not cry. I had already done his crying in rooms the city never saw. He pressed save again, the same way he had for years, and drove home. Eventually, Blaine noticed the numbers on his harassment clips beginning to fall. The internet was getting bored. I could feel it. Pranks were no longer enough. The audience wanted a bigger spectacle. So Blaine posted a poll asking whether the janitor should fight him. Nearly everyone who voted said yes. Blaine stared at the result with a strange warmth in his chest. Somewhere beneath the ego, in a part of himself he rarely visited, a quieter question appeared. Why did the old man's calm bother him so much? Blaine ignored it. When the gym was packed again, he stopped the music and called everyone toward the main mat. "Special event," he announced. He dragged a chair into the center, climbed onto it, and let the phones find him. "Ironclad, make some noise for the real star of my page, the mop man himself." Laughter rolled across the room. Dozens of cameras turned toward the far wall where Silas stood with his cleaning cart. At the front desk, Tessa quietly adjusted one of the security cameras so it had a clear view of the entire mat. Blaine walked over and gave Silas another shove, lighter this time, staged for the lens. "Oops, did I push you again, Grandpa? My mistake." Silas steadied the cart. "The floor is wet, son. Be careful. Careful. Hit me, old man. Right here. Free shot." "I don't fight, sir." "Of course you don't. Mops don't fight back, do they? Please let me finish my work. Get on the mat. 60 seconds with me, or kneel down and shine my belt. I'm 68 years old, son. Then you'll break easy. Swing at me. I'll even close my eyes." The phones moved closer. Someone started chanting for a fight. Others joined in. "Film this," Blaine called. "The janitor is scared. Say it, Grandpa. Say you're scared." Blaine pulled $500 from a money clip and slapped it down at the edge of the mat. $500 says you can't touch me. "Keep your money," Silas said. "Buy yourself a soft mattress." "A mattress? Why?" "Because everybody falls, son." Silas looked at him calmly. "Some people just haven't met the floor yet." The room went strangely quiet. It was the kind of silence that happens when a script stops being followed. Blaine blinked. Then he laughed louder to cover the discomfort. "Fine. You and me. 60 seconds. Everybody be here." The crowd erupted again, relieved to have the moment become entertainment. Garrett Reeves appeared near the edge of the mat, saw the cash, saw the cameras, and walked back into his office. Tessa watched Silas push his cart toward the supply room. His hands were still steady. His mop lines were still even. Only his jaw had changed. It looked like a door finally closing. Inside the supply room, Silas sat alone among spare mats and cleaning chemicals. He checked the calendar on his newer phone. His chest tightened. The day Blaine had chosen for the challenge was the anniversary of the day state troopers had come to Silas's house carrying their hats in their hands. The day a silver car, carrying Julian Whitaker, never made it beyond the highway outside Dayton. The day Silas's son died on the way to the national championships his father had spent years preparing him to reach. Of all the days Blaine could have chosen, he had chosen that one. 60 seconds, Silas whispered. He stared at the wall for a long time. Before the challenge, Silas went to Green Lawn Cemetery, carrying 2 folding chairs and 1 cup of coffee. He placed one chair near the grave of his wife, Miriam Whitaker, the other beside the grave of their son, Julian. Julian was 19 forever. Silas drank part of the coffee, then poured the rest slowly into the grass. "They want me on the mat today, baby," he told Miriam Stone. On his day. The wind moved softly through the trees. Silas turned toward Julian's grave and sat for a long while. "I'm not going to hurt that boy," he said at last. "I'm going to introduce him to himself." From his truck, Silas made one phone call to a number he had not used in years. The line connected. "Dorian, it's Coach." There was silence, then a breath, as if the man on the other end had suddenly needed to sit down. "Coach Whitaker, my God. Ironclad Performance Center. I need a witness." "A witness to what?" 60 seconds. At home, Silas opened the closet and took down an old canvas bag. He folded his training uniform into it. The white fabric turned cream with age. He left the black belt inside the wooden box. I would not wear rank against a young man who had no idea what he was standing in front of. "Defense only," Silas promised the empty house. Not one strike. When the challenge began, the parking lot was packed, and thousands of people were already waiting online for what they believed would be a beating. Inside Ironclad, hundreds crowded around the main mat. Someone had even printed a banner advertising the Janitor challenge. Blaine bounced in his corner, wearing a fresh team jacket, rolling his neck and playing to every camera pointed at him. The $500 sat near the edge of the mat. Garrett stood nearby, positioned exactly where managers stand when they want to be visible if something goes well, and invisible if it does not. Then the crowd parted. Silas Whitaker walked through wearing the old cream-colored training uniform. No belt, bare feet. The laughter began, then stumbled. Something about the way he moved did not match the joke everyone thought they were watching. There was no old man's shuffle now. Each step landed quietly and exactly. His weight moved from foot to foot like water settling into level ground. In the back of the room, a broad-shouldered man in a gray hoodie lowered his coffee and went completely still. "Nice pajamas, Grandpa," Blaine called. "You get those from Lost and Found. They were a gift." 60 seconds, Blaine said. "Try to survive." 60 seconds, Silas answered. "Try to listen." "Listen to what?" "Your own breathing, son. It's about to get loud." Garrett reluctantly stepped between them as referee. A timer began. Blaine attacked fast. He feinted a jab and fired his trademark right hand, the same punch that had folded fighter after fighter. It struck nothing. Silas was simply not where the fist arrived. His head moved only a few inches from the line of attack. No more than necessary. The gym heard the movement before it understood it. Bare feet whispering across vinyl. Blaine's sleeve snapping through empty air. A hook cut through the space where Silas's ribs had been. A high kick swept across where Silas's head had already stopped being. Silas did not block. Blocking is often what happens when you arrive late. Silas turned, shifted, breathed, and stayed just beyond each attack. Soon, nobody was laughing. Blaine's breathing grew louder, exactly as Silas had predicted. He swung harder. Harder made him slower. Slower made him angrier. And anger made every miss feel heavier. The live comments began changing. People stopped making jokes. "Is this real?" someone wrote. "The janitor is a ghost," another viewer answered. The audience continued climbing. Blaine heard none of it. All he could hear was his own lungs and the patient slide of 2 bare feet, refusing to stay where he wanted them. Then Blaine abandoned his striking and shot forward for a takedown, diving at Silas's legs. Silas lowered his hips, caught Blaine's shoulders, and turned. That was all. Just turned. Blaine's own speed did the rest. His body lifted over Silas's hip and landed flat on the mat. The impact rolled through the room. Hundreds of people inhaled at once. Blaine stared at the ceiling, stunned and emptied of breath. Silas stood over him with one hand extended. "Breathe, son. You're fine. The floor caught you." Blaine slapped the hand away and scrambled back to his feet. At the front desk, Tessa had stopped pretending to work. Her hands covered her mouth. The security monitor showed a wide angle. No phone could capture the entire mat, both men, every step. Tessa looked at the recording indicator. Then she pressed the command that protected the file from automatic deletion. That choice would matter more than anyone in the room understood. Blaine charged again. Technique had disappeared. Pride was driving now. He rushed forward with both hands reaching, all force and no patience. Silas stepped off the line, guided Blaine's reaching arm past its target, and let momentum finish the lesson. Blaine hit the mat face down and slid until he stopped near the tripod, holding his own livestream phone. The camera looked down at him. Tens of thousands of strangers looked with it. The timer was nearly finished. Blaine stood again with something loose and dangerous behind his eyes. He reached down, grabbed a metal water bottle from the edge of the mat, and swung it toward Silas's head. The crowd screamed. Silas moved inside the arc, trapped Blaine's swinging arm, and turned his hip one final time. But halfway through the fall, Silas saw something the crowd did not. Blaine's head was moving toward the hard concrete beyond the edge of the mat. Silas's hand shot behind the young man's neck. He caught him. He pulled Blaine inward and changed the direction of the fall. Instead of letting Blaine's head strike the concrete, Silas placed him onto the soft mat. He laid him down as carefully as if he were something fragile. The timer sounded. 60 seconds were over. Silas Whitaker had not thrown a single strike. He stood in the center of the mat, breathing as quietly as a man in a library. Then he bowed to the young fighter, gasping at his feet. Silas picked up the canvas bag, left the $500 untouched, and walked toward the locker room through a silence that felt almost physical. Blaine stayed on the mat for a moment, staring at the lights. Before the challenge, he had entered the room as a champion. Now he could feel a new meme being born around him in real time. Under the humiliation, however, there was another feeling he could not name. Almost awe. He bridled quickly and reached for anger instead. Anger was familiar. Anger had a father. At the edge of the crowd, the little boy from the children's class started clapping. I was alone at first. Then the other children joined him. Then their parents. Then the whole room. The applause grew into a rolling thunder. Blaine would hear again in his sleep. The broad-shouldered man in the gray hoodie did not clap. Dorian Pierce only watched Silas disappear down the hallway. "He's still perfect," he whispered. The internet found a new obsession. People reposted the full challenge. Martial arts channels slowed down the movements frame by frame. Analysts studied the footwork, the angles, the balance, and the old man's hand protecting Blaine's neck during the final fall. They all reached the same conclusion. This was not luck. This was mastery. Millions watched. The same question appeared in language after language. Who is the janitor? High above downtown, Conrad Prescott watched his son slide across a mat on a phone screen. He watched the clip twice. I did not call Blaine. He did not ask whether his son was hurt. Instead, Conrad called an attorney whose number money had kept close for years. Her name was Lenora Vale. Lenora did not simply take cases. She took territory. Conrad spoke quietly when she answered. "I need you to destroy a janitor." When Lenora reviewed the full live stream, she understood the problem immediately. "Your son challenged him publicly. There are hundreds of witnesses." He swung a metal bottle. If we fight the actual footage, we lose. Conrad slid a folder toward her. Then we don't fight the truth, he said. We replace it. Inside the folder was the architecture of a lie. There was a legitimate medical report showing Blaine had a sprained shoulder and bruising from the falls. There was a prepared statement describing the encounter as though Blaine had been threatened. And there was a strategy built on one simple fact about the internet. Most people never watch the whole video. Lenora, read through the plan. We file a civil claim for assault and battery. We say the janitor is a highly trained fighter who concealed his skills, provoked a young athlete, and injured him in front of children. She looked up. I'll need the gym's cooperation. Conrad smiled. I own the gym's cooperation. Blaine sat through the meeting wearing a sling he had been told to keep on in public. The sling was mostly theater. His shoulder hurt, but it worked. What did not work was his sleep. Every time. Blaine closed his eyes. He saw Silas's hand catching the back of his neck. The man Blaine's father planned to destroy had protected him in the middle of the throw. Blaine knew it. The unedited footage knew it. Sign here, Lenora said. Blaine picked up the pen. A new video appeared online. It was short, polished, and carefully cut. Gone was Blaine shoving Silas. Gone was the taunting. Gone was the bet. Gone was the metal bottle, swinging toward an old man's head. What remained was footage of an elderly janitor in an unfamiliar training uniform, throwing a young athlete to the floor several times while children watched nearby. The caption described Silas as a hidden fighter who had assaulted a local champion. News outlets picked it up. Headlines described a 68-year-old janitor with mysterious combat training injuring a young athlete inside a family gym. Comment sections changed direction almost overnight. Why was a trained fighter working around children? What was he hiding? Who hired him? Millions of people had seen the truth. Far more saw the edited lie. Silas had no social media accounts and no interest in fighting an algorithm. I went to work as usual and discovered his key no longer opened the side door. Garrett Reeves met him in the parking lot holding an envelope. Liability issue, Silas. Nothing personal. The board, the insurance company, you understand. Silas looked at the envelope. Years of work reduced to a small amount of severance pay. Garrett kept staring at the pavement. The Prescotts are also questioning your pension eligibility. Their attorney says there may be paperwork problems, but all of this can disappear. Silas waited. They want a public apology on camera. Say you provoked Blaine. Say you're sorry. Conrad drops the lawsuit. You keep your retirement. For a long moment, the only sound came from a flag rope tapping against its pole. I cleaned that floor for 9 years, Silas said. Never missed a corner. He looked at Garrett. You tell Mr. Prescott my knees don't bend that direction. Silas handed the envelope back, unopened, and walked toward his truck. Garrett remained there, holding the money like a man holding his own resignation letter. Not everyone believed the edited story. The mother of the little boy from the children's class called the gym to defend Silas and reached voicemail. Some members reposted the original live stream and pointed out the shove, the challenge, the cash, and the metal bottle. Their posts received hundreds of views, while the edited story received millions. Truth had arrived at the fight. It was simply outnumbered. Garrett later called Tessa into his office and closed the door. The lawsuit mentions our security system, he said. Lenora's team wants the normal retention policy followed. Old footage gets deleted automatically. Make sure the system stays compliant. Garrett never looked directly at her. Tessa understood perfectly. The wide-angle security recording showed everything. The shove, the challenge, the bottle. The moment Silas saved Blaine from striking the concrete. The file would eventually disappear if nobody protected it. Of course, Tessa said. That evening, she sat in her car with the silver hard drive on her lap. Her hands shook as she made more copies. Blaine stopped posting. His comment sections had turned into a war between people mocking him and people defending him. At dinner, Conrad talked about the lawsuit with the same confidence other fathers used to discuss sports scores. Blaine pushed food around his plate. He caught my neck, Blaine said quietly. Conrad did not look up. The footage will be gone. Eat. The The civil summons arrived by certified mail. Prescott versus Whitaker. The amount being demanded was $800,000. Silas read the papers twice at his kitchen table, then placed them beside a stack of bills and his pension statement. The mathematics were simple and brutal. Even winning could bankrupt him. Lawyers cost more than janitors earn. That night, old doubts returned wearing new clothes. 15 years earlier, Silas had walked away from martial arts because the road to a tournament had taken his son. Now he had stepped onto a mat for only 60 seconds and fighting seemed ready to take everything else. His house, his name, his quiet life. Maybe the lesson had never changed. Maybe every part of the fighting world eventually collected something from him. Silas took out the old phone and held his thumb above Julian's saved voicemail. For the first time in 15 years, he did not press play. I was afraid the voice would no longer sound like his son. I was afraid he would hear his own failure underneath it. Silas placed the phone face down, turned out the light, and lay awake in the dark. As the hearing approached, Lenora Vale kept feeding the press new pieces of the story. An unnamed source claimed the janitor had a violent past. Another source asked why martial arts schools in the state had no recent records of him. The story slowly took the shape money wanted it to take. By the time Silas sat alone at his kitchen table, staring at the summons, he had become one of the most hated men in the city, despite never throwing a single punch. Then, headlights moved across his front window. One vehicle, then another, then another. Car doors closed outside. Silas stood slowly. I was 68, fired, sued, and suddenly famous for all the wrong reasons. I had no idea who had come to his house. The knock at the door was soft, almost respectful. Silas opened it. 3 people stood on the porch, and 15 years seemed to stand behind them. Dorian Pierce filled much of the doorway with his shoulders. Beside him stood Celeste Warren, her posture still carrying the quiet precision of a world-class judo athlete. The third was Marcus Hale, dressed in a tailored coat with the logo of the gym chain he now owned stitched onto his cap. Nobody spoke at first. Then, Celeste stepped forward and wrapped both arms around Silas. "You stopped answering letters, coach," she said into his shoulder. "So we stopped writing." She pulled back and looked at him. "We came instead." They sat in Silas's kitchen for hours. Dorian had come to the challenge after Silas called him, and stayed after seeing the edited video. Hai had contacted the others immediately. Silas tried more than once to send them home. "This is my mess." Marcus set down his coffee. "Coach, you taught us the first rule of the corner." Silas looked at him. Nobody fights alone. Silas looked at the 3 faces he had helped build from nothing. For once, the old man had no argument left. The hearing room itself was small, but the story around it had grown enormous. Cameras filled the hallway outside. Judge Harlan Pierce took the bench with reading glasses, a careful manner, and little patience for theater. Conrad Prescott sat behind Lenora Vale, like a man who believed he had already read the ending. Blaine sat beside him, wearing the sling, eyes lowered. Silas arrived in a church suit with his hands folded. He represented himself because he could not afford anything else. Lenora controlled the room with the precision of a surgeon. She played the edited video on a courtroom screen. She repeatedly used the phrase concealed combat training. "Mr. Whitaker, what belt do you hold?" "I hold no belt, ma'am." "What rank have you held?" "Rank fades when you stop wearing it." "Answer the question." Silas paused. "Black belt. 3 disciplines." A murmur moved through the room. Lenora turned towards the judge. "A man with that level of training can become a weapon, Your Honor." That weapon worked beside children for 9 years without disclosing what he was capable of. Silas said nothing. His answers were slow and short, the way truth often sounds when it is not performing. Lenora stepped closer. "Why would a martial arts master spend 9 years pushing a mop, Mr. Whitaker? What were you hiding from?" For the first time, Silas's hands tightened on the table. The room leaned toward him. Even Judge Pierce looked up from his notes. Silas opened his mouth, then closed it. Some doors do not open easily in public. Lenora smiled at the silence and allowed it to work for her. No further questions. Then the doors at the rear of the courtroom opened. Dorian Pierce walked down the aisle wearing a state athletics jacket. Many people recognized him before he reached the front. I was a 3-time national middleweight champion, and now a respected collegiate head coach. Dorian asked permission to speak as a character witness. Judge Pierce considered it, then allowed him to proceed. Dorian raised his right hand, took the oath, and looked toward the rows of reporters. My name is Dorian Pierce. The man you've been calling a hidden threat is Silas Whitaker. He paused. We called him the Quiet Hand. Dorian looked toward Silas. He took me from a 14-year-old nobody and trained me into a national champion. He also trained Celeste Warren and Marcus Hale. Dorian turned toward the gallery. Stand up. Celeste and Marcus rose. The murmur became so loud that Judge Pierce had to bring the room back to order. Celeste was an Olympic medalist and a world champion. Marcus had retired undefeated and built a successful chain of martial arts gyms across several states. Lenora stood immediately. Objection. Relevance. Judge Pierce looked over his glasses. Counselor, you have spent a great deal of this hearing arguing about Mr. Whitaker's training history. I glanced toward the 3 former students. His training history just stood up. Overruled. Dorian's voice became quieter. You asked what Coach Whitaker was hiding from. I'll answer that because he probably never will. Silas went completely still. 15 years ago, Coach had another student. His best one. His son, Julian. Silas stared at the table. Julian was 19 years old. He died in a highway crash while traveling to the national championships his father had spent years preparing him to reach. Dorian swallowed. Coach beried his son. Then he locked his belt in a wooden box and never coached again. He looked at Silas and his next words cracked. I didn't leave fighting because he was dangerous. I left because he stopped forgiving himself. There's a difference. Silas looked down at his open hands. The same hands had wrapped Julian's wrists before competitions. The same hands had corrected his stance. The same hands had carried his son's casket. Nobody in the courtroom saw Silas cry, but his shoulders finally lowered, like a man setting down something he had carried up a very long hill. The room became quiet in a way courtrooms rarely do. One reporter wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her jacket. Blaine stared at Silas's back. The sling on his own arm suddenly seemed much heavier. Then the courtroom doors opened again. Tessa Caldwell walked down the aisle holding the silver hard drive as though it were made of glass. She had resigned from Ironclad before coming to court. Under oath, Tessa explained the security system's automatic deletion policy and the copies she had made before the footage could disappear. Judge Pierce ordered the full recording played. The courtroom watched the real story from beginning to end. Blaine shoving Silas. The taunting. The money slapped down at the edge of the mat. The public challenge. Silas refusing to strike. The metal bottle swinging toward his head. Then came the frame Judge Pierce asked to see again. Silas's hand reaching behind Blaine's neck, pulling his head away from the concrete. Changing the fall, placing him safely on the mat. When the lights came back up, nobody spoke for several seconds. On the frozen screen, an old man held a young fighter's head only inches away from disaster. Lenora's edited story had been defeated by the footage it tried to remove. From the gallery, the mother of the little boy from the children's class stood up. That man is the only adult in that gym who ever noticed my son when nobody else was watching, she said. Judge Pierce allowed the statement to remain. Lenora asked for a recess. She did not need much of one. When court resumed, she stood with the expression of someone who already knew the fight was over. Your Honor, my client moves to withdraw the complaint with prejudice. Judge Pierce removed his glasses. I imagined he might. The judge looked toward Conrad Prescott for a long moment. I also imagine the city attorney may have questions about who created and distributed that edited video. The complaint was dismissed. The gavel fell with the clean finality of a perfect throw. The room erupted into movement. Reporters rushed for the hallway. Conrad began speaking angrily to Lenora. Silas remained seated. Celeste rested one hand on his shoulder. 15 years of silence had been opened in a single hearing. Then a chair scraped across the floor. Blaine Prescott stood. He pulled the sling over his head, dropped it onto the table, and faced the judge. "Your Honor, may I speak?" Judge Pierce could have refused. The case was already over. Instead, he studied the young man standing without the sling and nodded once. Blaine did not walk to the witness stand. He turned toward the gallery and the cameras he had spent years feeding. "Everything Dorian Pierce said is true," he began. "Everything Tessa Caldwell showed you is true." His voice cracked. "I shoved him because he was a janitor, and I thought janitors were furniture." Blaine let the silence sit around that sentence. "He never threw one punch at me, not one." Blaine looked at the frozen image on the screen. "On the last fall, I was going head first toward concrete. He caught me." His eyes moved toward Silas. "The man I was trying to ruin caught me." Blaine swallowed hard. "I chose the day of the challenge, without knowing what that date meant to him. Now I know. I can't give that day back." Then Blaine bowed. It was clumsy and unpracticed, the first honest bow of his life. "I'm sorry, Mr. Whitaker." Silas looked at him for a long time and said nothing. Some apologies need time before they can be answered. Consequences followed quickly. The State Athletic Commission reviewed the unedited footage and stripped Blaine of his regional titles for conduct that violated the standards expected of a licensed competitor. The metal bottle alone ended most of the argument. His sponsors disappeared. The supplement company released a statement about values and ended the relationship. Conrad Prescott faced his own problems. The city attorney opened an inquiry into the edited video, and business partners began stepping away from major development projects carrying his name. The ironclad board, suddenly discovering courage after the danger had passed, removed Garrett Reeves from management. Garrett packed his framed sponsorship check himself. Tessa received offers from several news organizations because of the evidence she preserved. She turned them down and accepted a job with a law office instead. Eventually, Ironclad's board called Silas into the same office where his concerns had been ignored for years. They offered him the head coaching position. Full salary. His name on the wall. Silas listened with his hands folded. "I'll take it," he said, "on one condition." The board waited. Twice a week, the main mat belongs to the neighborhood. Free self-defense classes for every child who walks through that door. No fees. No special cuts. Nobody gets turned away because their parents can't pay. The board agreed before he finished speaking. Silas raised one finger. "One more thing." He looked around the room. "The program has a name." Nobody interrupted. "The Julian Whitaker program." Nobody argued with that either. On the first night, children sat cross-legged across the main mat. The little boy whose stance Silas had corrected months earlier sat in the front row. Silas entered carrying the wooden box and a hammer. First, he drove a small nail into the wall near the door. Then he lifted the photograph that had rested face down in his house for 15 years. He hung it where it could face every class. Julian Whitaker, 19 years old, smiling beneath a tournament banner, forever looking like he was one step away from becoming champion. Silas opened the wooden box in front of the children. He lifted the old black belt. For the first time in 15 years, he wrapped it around his waist. His hands did not shake. Years of silence ended in 2 quiet knots. "First lesson," Silas told the children. His voice reached every corner the way it once had. "The strongest thing you will ever learn on this mat is how to walk away from a fight." He paused. "The second strongest is making sure you can." The children nodded, as though they had just been handed something sacred. Dorian and Celeste watched from the back. The quiet hand had found his voice again. Silas had barely started teaching safe falling when the gym door opened. Blaine Prescott stood there wearing plain gray sweatpants and a simple sweatshirt. No logos, no entourage, no camera. The room went still. The children knew his face. Almost everyone in the state knew his face by then. Blaine walked to the edge of the mat and stopped at the tape line as though it were a border. He had no right to cross without permission. Then he bowed. "Mr. Whitaker, teach me the right way." Silas watched him. "I'll start from nothing," Blaine said. Silas studied the young man for a long, level moment. Then he pointed toward the supply closet. "Grab a mop first." Blaine blinked. Silas nodded toward the floor. "The floor teaches humility. Lesson 1 starts there." Blaine Prescott, former champion, former sponsor favorite, and former center of every room he entered, walked to the closet and picked up a mop in front of the children. Here was the strange part. Nobody laughed. The young man who had once filmed an old janitor falling now pushed a bucket in careful lines, while the old man taught children how to stand. The internet would have called it content. The mat called it justice. Months passed. The lights of Ironclad glowed warmly against cold evenings, and the main mat filled with more children than Silas had imagined. The Julian Whittaker program developed a waiting list. Then it opened another location. More followed. Dorian taught whenever he could. Celeste returned regularly to teach falling, which she called the most honest skill on earth because the floor never cared how important you thought you were. Marcus Hale quietly paid many of the program's expenses and refused interviews about it. Blaine was there constantly, and for the first time in his life, he became easy to miss. I wore plain white like every beginner. He asked the athletic commission not to rush any appeal on his behalf. He swept the mats before class and mopped them afterward in long, even arcs that never crossed their own path because he had asked Silas to show him how. Most of Blaine's online followers disappeared. He never went back to posting the way he had before. A reporter once cornered him outside and asked whether his time at the gym was part of a redemption story. Blaine thought for a moment. No, he said. It's just class. Silas still arrived before almost anyone else. Some habits hold up a life. He still read the floor while he walked it. He still folded cleaning rags in perfect thirds, but the photograph near the door faced outward now. Silas had started talking to it again. Small things, scores, stances. Which child finally remembered to keep her chin down? Each year, on the anniversary of Julian's death, the program held no classes. The mat stayed empty and the lights remained on in quiet remembrance of a champion who never reached the tournament he had trained for. Nobody needed to schedule it anymore. Everybody understood. The little boy from the children's class eventually earned his first stripe. When Silas tied it onto his belt, the boy leaned close and whispered something only the two of them heard. Silas laughed, a real laugh from deep in the chest. Later, Tessa asked what the boy had said. Silas smiled and continued mopping a floor he no longer had to mop. Some things are between a coach and his fighter. That answer contained the whole story if you were listening. Garrett Reeves ended up managing a storage facility on the south side. Conrad Prescott settled his legal problems quietly. But the towers that once carried his name stopped rising at the same pace. Power, it turns out, is a floor too. It holds you only as long as you respect what is beneath you. People still stopped Silas on the street and asked him about the 60 seconds on the mat. They wanted to hear about the throws. They wanted to know how he moved so fast. They wanted the secret technique. Silas always gave them the same answer. The fight was never the point. For 9 years, a master swept floors in silence, and almost nobody asked his name. It took 60 seconds of violence to make the world curious about a man that 60 seconds of kindness could have revealed. That may be the deepest lesson in Silas Whittaker's story. We are taught to notice titles, uniforms, followers, money, trophies, and the people who know how to make an entrance. We are much less practiced at noticing the person who empties the trash after everyone leaves, the person who cleans the room before anyone arrives, the cashier everyone talks over, the maintenance worker people point at without learning his name, the quiet employee whose life is far larger than the job printed on his badge. Silas was never less valuable when he carried a mop than when he tied on a black belt. The belt did not create his worth. The applause did not create it either. The courtroom did not finally make him important. All those things only forced other people to notice the value that had been standing in front of them the entire time. Blaine's mistake was not simply that he underestimated a skilled fighter. If Silas had never trained a day in his life, the humiliation still would have been wrong. That matters. The moral is not that we should respect the janitor, because he might secretly be able to throw us across a room. The moral is that we should respect him, because he is a human being. No hidden title should be required. No secret talent. No powerful connection. No dramatic reveal. Dignity should not have to prove itself before we recognize it. Blaine also learned something most people spend years avoiding. Being embarrassed is not the same as being destroyed. Sometimes humiliation can harden a person. Sometimes it can become an excuse for revenge. But if a person is willing to look honestly at what happened, humiliation can also become the moment when pride finally stops protecting the worst parts of us. Blaine's first reaction was anger, then denial, then a lie. He agreed to help destroy a man who had protected his life in the middle of a fall. That choice had consequences. His titles disappeared. His sponsors left. His reputation collapsed. He could not simply say sorry and expect everything to return. Real responsibility does not work that way. An apology can begin repair, but it does not erase consequences. That is why Silas did not answer Blaine immediately in the courtroom. Some apologies need time. Some need action. Some need to be proven quietly, long after the cameras leave. Blaine began proving his with a mop. Not because mopping was punishment. Silas would never insult his own work that way. I gave Blaine the mop because Blaine had treated the person holding it as invisible. If he wanted to learn humility, he needed to understand the work he had mocked. He needed to clean a floor. Nobody would applaud him for cleaning. I needed to do something useful without making himself the center of it. That is why nobody laughed when Blaine picked up the mop. The room understood that something serious had changed. Tessa's courage matters too. She did not have Silas's fighting skill. She did not have Conrad's money. She did not have a famous name. She had a front desk, access to a security system, and a feeling that something was wrong. So she preserved the truth before someone could erase it. That small decision became the difference between a lie winning and a lie being exposed. Most meaningful acts of courage do not announce themselves as courage when they happen. Sometimes they look like saving a file. Sometimes they look like refusing to laugh. Sometimes they look like speaking when a manager would rather you stay quiet. Sometimes they look like showing up at an old coach's door because he once taught you that nobody fights alone. And sometimes courage looks like restraint. Silas could have hurt Blaine badly. He chose not to. I could have struck him. He chose defense. He could have let Blaine's head hit the concrete after the metal bottle came out. Instead, his first instinct was still to protect the young man attacking him. That may be the clearest picture of strength in the entire story. Strength is not only what you are capable of doing. Sometimes strength is what you are capable of doing and choose not to do. Silas did not need to destroy Blaine to prove he was better. He simply refused to become cruel in order to defeat cruelty. That does not mean we should accept mistreatment in silence. Silas eventually stepped onto the mat. Tessa eventually brought the evidence into court. Dorian, Celeste, and Marcus eventually stood beside their coach. There was accountability. There were consequences. There were hard truths spoken in public. Kindness does not mean becoming a doormat. Forgiveness does not mean pretending nothing happened. Humility does not mean allowing other people to erase you. Living with dignity means knowing when to walk away, when to stand your ground, when to tell the truth, and when to leave room for another person to become better than they were. Silas also carried a burden that had nothing to do with Blaine. For 15 years, he had blamed part of himself for Julian's death. He had locked away his belt, his photograph, his coaching voice, and a whole part of his identity because grief convinced him that returning to the mat would somehow betray the son he lost. But grief does not always ask us to stop loving the things we once shared with someone. Sometimes healing means finding a way to carry them forward. The Julian Whittaker program did not erase the accident. It did not make Silas's loss smaller. It gave the love somewhere to go. That is different. Pain that cannot be undone can still become care for someone else. A memory that once closed a door can eventually become the reason another door opens. Silas spent years believing the mats had taken his son. In the end, he returned to those same mats and gave hundreds of children a safer place to grow. There is something deeply human in that. We do not get to choose every loss that enters our lives. We do get to make choices about what we build around the empty spaces afterward. And the people who helped Silas rebuild did not do it with grand speeches. They showed up. Dorian answered a phone call. Celeste came to the porch. Marcus paid bills without asking for credit. Tessa carried a hard drive into court. A child's mother spoke one true sentence when the room needed it. Even Blaine, after failing in painful and public ways, eventually came back without a camera and asked to start from nothing. That is how repair often works. One ordinary choice after another. This story also leaves us with a question about power. Conrad had money. Garrett had authority inside the gym. Blaine had followers, trophies, and attention. Lenora had influence and legal skill. For a while, all of that power seemed strong enough to rewrite reality. But power used without respect becomes unstable. It is a floor, too. You can stand on it for a long time and believe it belongs to you. Then one day, if you have treated everyone beneath you as though they do not matter, you discover there was never anyone beneath you at all. There were only people you failed to see. Silas understood the floor better than any of them. He knew balance is never permanent. He knew everyone falls. He also knew falling is not the end of the lesson. What matters is how you get back up and what kind of person rises. Blaine fell in front of thousands of people. The most important part of his story was not the fall. It was what happened afterward. He could have spent the rest of his life blaming Silas, the internet, his father, the judge, or the footage. Instead, slowly and imperfectly, he began learning to take responsibility for himself. That does not make him the hero of Silas's story. It makes him a person who was finally willing to learn. There is value in that too. So if this story stays with you, do not only remember the 60 seconds on the mat. Remember the 9 years before them. Remember the old man cleaning around people who rarely looked at him twice. Remember the boy whose stance he fixed when nobody was watching. Remember Tessa saving a file because she knew the truth might need a witness. Remember 3 former champions arriving at a quiet brick house because their coach once taught them that nobody fights alone. Remember a father finally turning over a photograph he had kept face down for 15 years. Remember a former champion standing at the edge of the mat without an entourage and asking to begin again. And remember the mop, the object Blaine once used as a symbol of somebody else's smallness, became the first tool of his own humility. There is no shame in honest work. There is only shame in treating the people who do it as though they are less human than you. The next time you enter a gym, an office, a hospital, a store, a hotel, or any place kept running by people whose names rarely appear on the wall, look around. Ask yourself whether you notice the people who make the room possible. Learn a name. Say thank you. Do not wait for a hidden championship belt, a courtroom reveal, or a viral video before deciding someone deserves respect. Do not wait for the mat to teach you who is standing beside you, because worth does not wear a uniform. Character does not need an audience, and some of the strongest people you will ever meet may be carrying their whole legend quietly while everyone else walks past. If you had been standing in that gym while Silas sat in dirty mop water and people laughed, what would you have done? Would you have laughed because the room was laughing? Would you have filmed because everyone else had a phone out? Would you have looked away because speaking up felt uncomfortable? Or would you have remembered that there was a human being on the floor before there was ever a secret master, a national champion, or a courtroom story? The answer matters, not because any of us can go back and change Silas's story, because tomorrow, somewhere, somebody else will be standing in a room feeling invisible. A janitor, a cashier, a maintenance worker, a delivery driver, a quiet co-worker, a person everybody has become too used to seeing to truly notice. Be the person who asks their name. Be the person who does not join the laugh. Be the person who remembers that dignity should never have to reveal a secret identity before we decide to respect it.